here. Also, if you would like to ask a question at the end, there's a chat box. Pop your question in as the presentation goes on, and then I'll pick a few at random, and we'll ask Joanna at the end all the questions. So our first session is by Joanna Pulman, qualified as a dietitian in 2006, has been working as a kidney dietitian in the Dorset Kidney Service since 2009. Also been on the Renal Nutrition Group Committee since 2017, initially as a meeting coordinator, and now as a patient representative, linking in with the UK kidney charities and developing resources for patients. So I'll hand you over to Joanna.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Pete. So if I can just share my screen. Okay, so you should be able to see my presentation now, hopefully. So yeah, no, thank you very much, Pete. As you said, my name's Jo Pulman. I'm one of the kidney dietitians based down in Dorset County Hospital in Dorchester. So when Pete and the NKF first approached us about this topic, I thought, well, that's going to be quite difficult to cover because it's quite a broad subject, and just the very nature of kidney disease and nutrition and diet. You know, our advice to patients is always very individualized depending on the stage of kidney disease, blood results, etc. So it's going to be a very difficult topic to cover. So I've kept things really quite broad, and as Pete says, if you have got any questions, then pop them in the chat, and we can answer those towards the end. So I thought I'd just start off then just with giving you a little overview of what we'll cover. So I'll talk through a little bit about the background between diet and kidney disease and where it all began, thinking about the importance of good nutrition for everybody and sort of diving into specific nutrients there as well, and then just finishing up with a little thought on dietary restrictions. So, history of nutrition and kidney failure. Well, it's been known for the better part of 100 years actually that diet can have a big impact on kidney disease and how our body reacts to kidney disease. And in the 1930s, then low protein diets were shown to prolong the life of rats with kidney disease. Moving on into the 1940s, specifically with patients with acute kidney injury, it was brought about having no protein diets and no electrolyte diets, so no potassium, phosphate, magnesium, etc. in the diet. And that was really just to prolong life until such a point as the kidney function picked up and patients could then go back to enjoying a more normal diet. So at this point, though, there was no treatment for chronic kidney disease. That came about, I guess, towards the 1960s when dialysis became more available. And then we had people such as Giordano and Giovanetti bringing in our low protein diets. So this was about 20 grams of protein per day, and it was aimed really at delaying disease progression and reducing symptoms and keeping people as well as possible until they needed to start onto dialysis. These diets were really specifically calculated. As I say, you know, you're looking at 20 grams of protein per day, which is really difficult to achieve. And due to the fact that they were sort of no salt and really quite high in fat and sugar in order to achieve sort of calories there as well and keep people as well nourished as possible, patients found it really difficult to stick to these diets. As treatment progressed and diet therapy evolved alongside it, in the 1970s and 1980s, dietary advice was more about like a more normal protein intake. Potassium restrictions became more commonplace, and no added salt diets and fluid restrictions as well. Phosphate restrictions and phosphate binders were also introduced around this time. Currently, the UK Kidney Association recommends that all UK-based kidney patients should have access to a kidney dietitian to be able to get specific, detailed and evidence-based advice that's individualized to them. So that's where we're at now. So as I say, you know, current dietary recommendations, if you have a kidney problem, would be first and foremost an emphasis on really good quality nutrition. So making sure that what you're eating is good quality and giving you the nutrients that you need, and as well enjoying food. You know, if you think about it, food is so integral to everything these days. You know, a family meal and around the table at the end of the day, it's when we all sit and actually talk to each other. And evidence is that that's when we'll have the most sort of communication within our family. Festivals and festivities, celebrations, there's always food at those things. And we want our kidney patients to be able to enjoy food as much as everybody else. And we don't want it to be that you happen to make one meal for the person with kidney problems and then another meal for everybody else in the family. They should be able to enjoy a normal diet so much as they can. However, within this, our advice to each individual is individualized. So it's based upon your stage of kidney disease, your blood test results, the medications that you're taking, anything else that's going on with you clinically as well, your culture, your nutritional status. So all of these things should be taken into account when we're thinking about the diet for you. And things like potassium and phosphate are only limited these days when they need to be. So it's not a blanket, one size fits all diet anymore. So in terms of the importance of good nutrition, it's vital to maintain health and well-being. You know, you eat well, you need to get the nutrients from your diet to keep your immune system functioning, for wound healing, to keep your muscles strong, and so on. And I'm sure that everybody here will have seen this Eat Well Guide picture at some stage somewhere along the line. And this basically just demonstrates the relative proportions of the different food groups that you should be eating each day. So as you can see, the most amount of what we would eat each day would be the green section and the yellow section, which corresponds to your fruits and vegetables, and then your starchy carbohydrate food that your body will use for energy. The little pink section there is your protein foods, so your meat, fish, dairy foods, or other sort of non-meat alternatives there as well. The blue section is your dairy foods, and the little purple section is your treats. So that's the foods that are going to be high in fats and sugars, and the things that really are just like the icing on the cake, if you like. They're not a main part of your diet. So if we break it down by nutrient then, and I guess salt isn't necessarily a nutrient, but it's a good starting point because this is the one thing that's going to be common to all kidney patients, and in fact the general population at large. So what you can see in this picture here is that the government recommends currently that we're aiming for a maximum of 6 grams of salt per day, which is about 1 teaspoon, which is not a lot really when you actually stop and think about it. And if you look at this picture, what you can see is that the UK, the general adult population, is still having more salt than the government would recommend. The US, Japan, China, and other countries not represented in this little picture here, but I'm sure that their salt intakes would also be similarly high. The reason that we would be sort of so specific on minimizing salt and aiming for your maximum of 6 grams per day is that salt is really heavily associated with high blood pressure. So the more salt you have in your diet, the more prone to high blood pressure you're going to be. And as much as your doctors will be giving you medications to help control blood pressure, if you're still having a lot of salt in your diet, then you're kind of counteracting those medications. And, you know, blood pressure, high blood pressure being one of the most common causes of kidney failure in the UK, then this is a really important part of the diet, is minimizing your salt intake. As you move on through your kidney journey as well, salt is associated with an increased thirst. And I'm sure if you've had a really salty meal or you've been out for a takeaway or something, it's really salty, you'll know that actually you're a lot more thirsty through the day or into the next day. And this is particularly important later on if you are told that you need to be careful with your fluid intake. Then salt, reducing your salt, is very much a part of watching your fluid as well. So as dietitians, what we would normally suggest is choosing food items that are going to be reduced in salt. So if you're buying, say, a ready meal or something, if you've got a packet that's just your standard option and then one that's reduced in salt, then choose the reduced salt item, absolutely. And then looking at your food labels, and this is a really easy one now, as companies are getting better at labeling their foods, what you'll find is on the front of packets, you've got your traffic light system. So if you're picking up a food that's got a red traffic light for salt, well, you know then that's going to be a treat food. That's not an everyday food. It's too high in salt. You want to be aiming for more of the green foods or the amber foods, but really putting those foods that have that red salt traffic light back on the shelf. The other thing that we would advise for all kidney patients is not replacing salts from the table with things like low salt or the Saxa low salt, for the reason that these are actually made from potassium. And as I'm sure most of you will have heard, then potassium can be a problem for some kidney patients, not all. And so we don't want to be introducing potassium into the diet necessarily where we don't need to, in things such as salt replacers that are not necessary. What we would be suggesting is that our kidney patients should really get used to the flavour of food where it's not disguised in salt. So really getting used to a low salt or a no added salt diet, more so than using these salt substitutes. And really as well, being careful with seasoning. So things like all-purpose seasoning or jerk seasoning or other sorts of rubs that you can get, because these can actually be really quite high in salt. So if we think about it, then about three-quarters of the salt that, that 6 grams of salt, 3/4 of that will come already in food. So it's not like we really need to be adding it into food. You're not going to be short on salt. That's one of the things that our patients sometimes say is, oh, but we need salt. Well, you get salt, it's fine. And then just, thinking about your salty ingredients. So when you're in your kitchen and you're cooking, being mindful, if you think back about China and Japan having high salt intakes, well, a lot of the sauces and the seasonings that you would use in your ethnic diets and also in normal diets, so things like curry pastes, miso, soy sauce, even the reduced salt type, seasonings, stock cubes, broths and soups and savoury snacks, they're all really quite high in salt. So just be checking your food labels and keeping things like that to a minimum, and just being mindful that a dash of this and a pinch of that, it will add up. So be careful with what you're doing in the kitchen. So then if we think about our food groups that we started off with, if we start out with protein, then this is obviously things like your meat and fish, dairy foods, nuts, seeds, tofu, or other meat alternatives. And I would say that with protein, our recommendations for protein change as kidney disease progresses. And as kidney disease progresses, it then becomes much more of a fine balance between getting enough protein to meet your requirements and to minimize muscle loss, but then not too much, because having too much can accelerate the loss of kidney function, particularly towards end stage. And the extra protein in your diet, as the body breaks that down, it can increase your production of urea, which is one of the things that can make you feel quite unwell towards end stage. So it really is a bit of a fine balance there between getting enough but not too much. What we would always suggest, though, is where possible, choosing your fresh sources of protein over processed sources. So if you have the ability to make yourself, a homemade shepherd's pie or a homemade lasagna or bolognese roast dinner, rather than picking up a ready meal or something that's been processed or packaged, then we would strongly recommend choosing your fresh foods as much as possible. You'll find that it's got more protein in it. The quality of the protein will be better. It'll be lower in salt. And, if things like phosphate are a problem for you, then they're going to be lower in phosphate as well. So fresh is always going to be best. However, if you do need to use those processed foods because it's a choice between that or not eating, then obviously there's a time and a place for those things. We'd also suggest choosing plant-based sources of protein as well. There's a lot of evidence supporting plant-based diets, and I'll come back to that in just a minute. And that would be basing the meal around things like lentils or pulses, or other non-meat alternatives, things like seitan or tofu as well. One question that we get asked quite often is, oh, do I need to stop eating meat? I've got kidney problems. Should I stop eating meat? And the answer to that is no. It's really just about making sure that you're getting enough protein, but not too much, and having good quality protein, and just considering the balance of your diet overall. So thinking back then about your plant-based diet, there's a lot of ongoing research at the moment into that. And by plant-based, what we mean is predominantly foods derived from plant sources. So things like fruits and vegetables, grains, pulses, legumes, or your meat substitutes, nuts. It can include some animal products as well. So it's not a vegetarian diet or a vegan diet, but it's sort of edging on using more of the plant-based things and less of your animal products. And what I would say is that the evidence shows that at the moment, a healthy plant-based diet is beneficial in delaying the progression of kidney disease. So that is choosing your whole grain products, choosing healthier sources of meat substitutes or plant-based foods, rather than the refined stuff, the stuff that's going to have been heavily processed, food items that are going to be really high in sugar, or having a lot of fruit juices. You know, as I say, it just goes back to thinking about a healthy and well-balanced diet rather than just cutting out meat. Thinking then about your carbohydrates or your starchy foods. So that's obviously things like your breads, potatoes, pasta, rice, noodles, things like yam, cassava, plantain, cereals. And it's recommended for everyone that you include some of these starchy foods regularly through the day. These are the foods that are going to be used by the body for energy. So they are important. And I would say that for people with diabetes in particular, but everybody generally, choosing higher fiber types is going to be better. So for people with diabetes, it's going to have a smaller effect on your blood sugars. But for everyone, you know, that fiber is going to be good for your bowels. It's going to keep you feeling fuller for longer as well, and it's going to keep your energy levels more steady. So with regards to your carbohydrate foods, then I would say really just, you know, do enjoy them regularly throughout the day, keep your fuel up, but think about your portion sizes. So I think that's probably one of the places that we do fall down, is that we are carb lovers. And so just be mindful that you're not having too large portions of your carbohydrate foods, and then minimizing your intake of your sugary carbohydrate foods as well, so things like your sweets and treats. Another question that we get asked in relation to your starchy foods is, oh, do I need to soak or double boil my potatoes? And the answer to that would be no, we don't recommend double boiling these days. So that's something that you would have been recommended in years gone by, but current recommendation is, in terms of your potatoes, sweet potatoes, or any of your other tubers, then I would peel them, chop them, and boil them, or at the very least parboil them before you do anything else to them. Moving swiftly on then back into your fruits and vegetables. So these foods are obviously, as I said to you at the start, they're one of the foods that should make up a large proportion of your diet. We recommend to everybody that you include a good variety of fruits and vegetables each day, because this is, you know, they're dense in your vitamins and minerals that are important for keeping you healthy. And also they contain fiber to keep the bowels healthy. A lot of the time we get patients coming in to see us who have been to see their diabetes dietitian, and then they've come to see us and they've got a problem in combining what they think the diabetes dietitian has told them and what they think we're trying to tell them. And, you know, they think that the diabetes dietitian is telling them to have more fruit and vegetables, and we're telling them to have less. And what I would say is that we're not telling you that at all, but we're telling you the same thing, in that you should be having fruit and vegetables. You should be enjoying these as part of your day-to-day diet. They're important for everyone. But for people who may have problems with potassium in kidney failure, then you may be told that certain of your fruits and vegetables, you do need to be careful of the amount of them that you would have, or the frequency with which you're having them, and to choose more of your low potassium ones. So we're not contradicting the diabetes dietitians and saying have less. We're saying have some, but be mindful of what you choose. And if you are confused, then do speak to us. Don't just get annoyed or frustrated and ignore the lot of us because we're talking twaddle. Then, you know, talk to us about it if you're confused. We suggest it, as I say, including a variety each day. And these days, frozen varieties and tinned varieties of fruit and vegetable can be as good as the fresh stuff. So if one of your concerns is that fruits and vegetables are going to go off before you get around to eating them, then by all means choose fresh, frozen or tinned. But the only thing that I would say is if you're choosing tinned vegetables, then just watch out for the amount of salt that these vegetables can be tinned in. And you know, the question that we get asked there at the bottom, I need to avoid all fruit and vegetables because of potassium. No, that's not true at all. Even if your potassium is elevated, we still want you to include fruit and vegetables. And I'll come to potassium in just a moment. As I said, dietary restrictions. So in terms of potassium and phosphate, I can't emphasize this enough. Some, but not all, kidney patients may be advised that they need to limit potassium or phosphate. And this is based on your blood results. And what I would say is that there are many, many reasons why your potassium or phosphate may be high, and it's not always down to diet. So before you make any changes to your diet, then speak to your dietitian, because A, you know, unless your levels are high, we wouldn't recommend you restricting your diet anyway. And B, there may be other things that we need to think about before we start changing your diet. So, you know, don't go making any changes before you've spoken to someone. And if you have concerns or questions, then raise it with your dietitian. So in summary, as dietitians, what we're aiming for all of our kidney patients is that you eat well at all stages of kidney disease and that you enjoy your diet. That's the most important thing to us as dietitians. We enjoy food and we want you to enjoy food. Any dietary advice that you are given will be individualized based on your blood results, your clinical condition, your social situation, your ethnicity, all of the above. So, you know, there is no such thing as a kidney diet. And what works for the person sat next to you in the waiting room is not necessarily going to be the advice that you're given. So, you know, be careful and mindful when you're thinking about changes to your diet. The only thing that is common to everybody is limiting or avoiding salts. And the other thing that I would say is what we find more and more is that people like to do their research on the internet, and we do encourage this. You know, we want people to be making informed decisions and taking control of their clinical condition. But I would say to you to make sure that you're using reputable websites, because there is so much out there and not all of it is good information. So make sure that what you're using is a reputable website. And if you've got any questions about where to look, then your renal team should be able to point you in the right direction. So useful resources, your kidney dietitian, they will be an excellent resource. They should have access to your diagnosis, any other clinical factors that will impact the advice that you should be given. They'll know what your blood tests show, and they'll be able to point you towards any local or national resources that will be helpful for you specifically. There are many kidney-friendly recipe websites and books out there, so including but not limited to TASTE, which is the Kidney Federation one. So you can get that through the NKF website. There's Truly Tasty on Amazon and through all of your other bookshops and online bookshops. And there are a good variety of other kidney recipe books out there as well. And there's the Vital Arts Helping Hands recipe book that's, I don't think has been released yet. I'm not sure on the release date for that. There's obviously the NKF website, which you will all be aware of because that's how you signed up to this webinar. There is the Kidney Patient Guide, which is a website which has some really simple information for kidney patients and some really useful picture demonstrations and diagrams as well. So that's one that I'd recommend. And then if you've got diabetes or problems with cholesterol or heart problems, then there are your sort of diabetes, your Heart UK, the British Heart Foundation websites as well. And as I say, that list is not exhaustive at all. So all that remains is just to say thank you very much. Thank you, Pete and Andrea, for inviting me to speak this evening. And if anyone's got any questions?
Thank you very much, Joe. That was fantastic. You've set the bar high for other webinars we're going to be doing next year. There is lots and lots of questions. There is. So, okay. Right, here we go. Would like to ask about losing weight for kidney transplant and dialysis patients. What advice have you got?
So obviously, if you are aiming to have a transplant, then weight, being of a healthy weight, so a BMI of 30, or I think the maximum is 35 in some centres, that is important. And the advice that we would give to kidney people aiming for weight loss would be the same as we'd give to sort of the general population in terms of healthy eating, watching your portion sizes, exercise. Locally, I'm sure that there are going to be sort of specific weight management groups and things that your team should be able to point you towards if you do need support. Or otherwise, you know, things like your Weight Watchers and Slimming World can be helpful in support if you're sort of trying to look after your weight. But there is no magic wand. There's no sort of specific advice that I would suggest, really. Speak to your dietitian.
Brilliant. As a vegetarian, my protein has been coming from plant protein, which is very high in potassium. Any advice?
It would depend on what your potassium level is, really. So, I mean, if your potassium level is running high, then you might need to speak to your dietitian about your diet as a whole. And, you know, is there anywhere else that you can lose potassium from in the diet so that you can maintain your protein intake? Because you obviously need the protein there, but is there something else in the diet that can be adjusted to help reduce your protein and your potassium intake? It's about balance, really, but making sure that you've got your protein.
Yeah, and we've got another one on protein. How can I seek advice from my hospital of not exceeding protein levels, especially as a vegetarian who is strength training to become a power lifter?
Oh, wow. Okay. For that, I would say go and speak to your dietitian. That's going to be really quite specific. We don't get many trainee power lifters in the kidney unit, I have to say. So good for you. I'm really pleased that you're doing exercise and aiming for that. That's brilliant. But I would say speak to your dietitian, because that's going to take some real specific sort of unpacking of what you're eating there and what supplements you may or may not be taking. Yeah, but wow, good for you. Great.
We're testing you tonight, aren't we? Is it
Yeah,
a bad
you really
thing?
are.
Is it a bad thing to not eat fruit at all?
I mean, fruit and vegetables are going to be an important part of the diet. You need the vitamins and minerals from them. If you're not a fruit lover, then I would say fine, try and have more of your vegetables and salad, but make sure that you're getting something there. And if you're really not interested in having fruit and vegetables at all, then you would be recommended to have at least a vitamin and mineral supplement, I should think. So again, go back to your kidney team, your kidney dietitian, your GP, somebody about that. But you do need to make sure you're getting those vitamins and minerals to maintain your health.
Questions still coming in. So are oats a good source of nutrition?
Oats.
Oats, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, they're a fine source of carbohydrate and energy in the morning. They're not, depending on how you make them up. If you're going to make your oats up with some milk into a porridge in the morning, then you'll get a bit of protein from your milk there. I mean, it can make a good part of a well-balanced diet, but I wouldn't base my diet on oats unless you're aiming for some sort of nutrient deficiencies. No, that they're a part of a well-balanced diet.
Is there any way of working out how much protein you should have?
Yes, we have formulae for that. So the kidney dietitian that you should be seeing will be able to work out what the level of protein intake should be based on your level of kidney disease, so where you're at, and then thinking about your weight and anything else that you've got going on. So our power lifter, who's aiming for sort of muscle gaining, then may have higher protein requirements than one of our little elderly older ladies that's sort of pre-dialysis and hasn't got much muscle mass and isn't doing very much. So it would very much depend on the patient.
In the terms of green veg, which is high in potassium, example, ladies' fingers, how can I reduce the potassium in this?
Things like ladies' fingers, I would say you'd reduce the potassium by boiling them and throwing away the cooking water. I think you can get things like that canned these days as well, which again, if you're having those tinned vegetables, then draining them off will reduce the potassium content there. But things like okra, lady's fingers, they are, I think, actually quite high in potassium. So you would still need to be mindful of your portion size that you're having and what else you're having with them. So if they're a side of your dish, or if they're involved in the dish, then what else is in that dish?
I'm trying to convert to plant-based diet, but quite a few of them are made of pea protein. And I believe I should be avoiding peas with kidney disease. Is this correct?
So actually, that has been a thing, a part of the chats within our renal dietitian network over the past few days, is that there are more products out there that are sort of designed for plant-based diets, and they are based on pea protein, chickpea protein. And that's fine, because where you're replacing the sort of potassium that you would normally get from meat, you're replacing that with the potassium that you get from things like peas or chickpeas or lentils. They're not one to avoid. Some of them, I would say, just watch out for your food labeling. Watch out for if they've got any added potassium. Potassium chloride is something to look out for on food labels. And as part of a well-balanced diet, then things like that are fine. It's just being careful as to how you're combining those foods and what you're putting them with. And speak to your kidney dietitian if you've got worries about it, because it might not even be a problem for you, you know.
Should people with stage 1 and 2 kidney disease see a dietitian?
If there's anything specific that they need to see a dietitian about. So people with stage 1 and 2 kidney disease don't have any specific requirements, dietary requirements relating to their kidney disease. If you've got other things that you would like to speak to a dietitian about, like your weight or your blood pressure, or, you know, anything else really, then I would say, if you don't have a kidney dietitian as part of your team, then speak to your GP, who could put you in touch with a community dietitian for those specific things.
Excellent. 2 years post-transplant patient here, trying a plant-based diet. What should I look out for?
As I said in my presentation, really, it's just about being healthy. So not just cutting out meat and living on fruits and vegetables. It's making sure that you're getting enough protein into your diet as part of your plant-based diet. So you're looking at balance, overall balance there, and choosing healthier food options. If you're 2 years post-transplant, then I really hope for you that your transplant function is still good. But if you are losing function and heading back towards your sort of low clearance clinic, then you may need to start thinking about your protein intake again. And in which case, your kidney dietitian should be able to speak to you about that. But generally speaking, it would just be about balance.
Right, here we go. How can I see a dietitian when I can't get an appointment with a GP or renal consultant?
That is a tough one, I guess. So, I mean, it would depend on where you're at. So whether or not you have, if you're sort of early on in your kidney disease and you wouldn't really see a kidney dietitian anyway, then you just need to keep banging on the door of your GP, I guess, or find a GP that can fit you in if your current GP surgery is too busy. If it is that you're sort of in the latter stages and you should be under a kidney dietitian, then again, it's just keeping on at your kidney consultants or going through their secretaries or any other way in the door that you can find. We get our referrals in through all sorts of members of the kidney team, you know, the admin staff, the nurses. So anybody that you can get to listen to you, speak to them.
Excellent. Are you okay to take a few more questions?
Yes.
So any recommendations for a recent kidney donor, please?
I mean, I guess the recommendations would be the same as they would be for the general population, which is just about healthy eating. So if you're a recent donor and you've still got your wound that's healing, then I would say make sure you're getting plenty of protein in and nutrients to encourage wound healing. But after that, it's just about healthy eating and looking after your own health and well-being. So making sure your diet is well balanced, not overdoing it on the sweets and treats, low salts. You've only got one kidney, so just make sure you're looking after it.
And this one I think we covered in your presentation really, but my consultant has advised me there is no budget for kidney dietitians to advise me. What are the resources available for me?
Yeah, so I'm guessing then that if there is no budget for a kidney dietitian, that you'll be fairly early on in your kidney disease. And that's actually quite common, is that, you know, stages 1, 2, even at stage 3, you don't necessarily have access to the kidney dietitian because we are so pushed. And so we'll only see those patients that are towards end stage. Or at least low clearance. So then I would say that it's going back to your GP and pushing for an appointment with a community dietitian if there is no budget for a kidney dietitian. Community dietitians will be able to link in with kidney dietitians if there is anything specific. And I know that my department, we do consult with our community colleagues regarding specific issues. So the advice that you will get will not be less. It will be just as good.
Should kidney patients avoid caffeine?
Not necessarily, no. I would say keep it within sort of the recommended sort of targets of not having too much caffeine through the day, avoiding it later at night because you're not going to sleep. The only thing with caffeine, I guess, is that it can bump up blood pressure. So if blood pressure is an issue, then I'd probably minimize your caffeine intake. I'd probably steer clear of things like your energy drinks, so you know, your Red Bulls and Monster drinks, just because I can't imagine that they're very good for anybody, generally speaking. But you know, a cup of coffee or a cup of tea here and there, fine.
One here what says I'm in the early stages of polycystic kidney disease and my kidney function is currently normal. Would I still have to limit protein, or do I need to talk to a dietitian?
No, at the early stages, where your kidney function is still pretty good, then I would just say to you to eat a normal, healthy and well-balanced diet. Make sure that you've got enough protein there to support whatever it is that you're aiming to achieve in life. So maintaining your muscle mass, or extra protein if you are one that does an incredible amount of exercise, or you know, it's not restrictions at that stage, it's healthy eating at that stage.
Right, a couple more and then we're going to have to close. So my kidney is leaking high levels of protein. Should I be increasing my protein intake?
No, we don't really recommend that these days, actually. So, you know, in years gone by, for people that are having a lot of protein in the urine, then people would have said, doctors would have said, oh, they need a high protein diet to replace, or you know, they need a low protein diet or whatever. And actually, I would just say to you that protein intake should be maintained at a normal level. And really, the cause of your proteinuria should be being what's treated there. So I wouldn't be limiting protein, and I wouldn't be having extra protein either.
Right, last one then. My potassium is low. Other than eating bananas, what else should I eat to raise these levels?
Okay, so I've actually just been dealing with a patient myself, so that's why I smile, who's had this problem. And it is, you know, if you think about all of those foods that are high in potassium, then those are the ones to go for. So things like, you know, your fruits and vegetables at large. I'd probably suggest steaming your vegetables as opposed to boiling them to keep your potassium in them. Things like nuts and seeds and dried fruit are all good sources of potassium as well. Dairy foods can be quite good for potassium. Things like including milk in your diet. Coffee, hot chocolate, cocoa, crisps. If you go on the website and look at a low potassium diet and reverse it, that's really what you're aiming for. But if you have a dietitian that you have access to, they probably will be able to give you some written information on that. But no, I would just say don't restrict anything in that instance.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much. Just been a wealth of questions and answers there.
Hasn't
really,
it?
Very impressive. And if anyone thinks, oh, I'd love to recommend this webinar, well, we've recorded it. We're going to put it on the website tomorrow, kidney.org.uk, and they'll be able to watch again. Joe, thank you very much. This has
Oh,
been
you're very
great.
welcome, and I hope it's been useful to everybody out there.
Yes, it has been very useful. And we'll be starting a series of webinars every other month, starting in the new year. So look out for our social media feeds and In Touch and Kidney Life, and we'll do more of these. So thank you very much and have a good evening.